My fiancé shut me out of the family trip I paid for because her mom brought her ex, so I cancelled the cards and left them broke overseas. The moment I saw him, my entire world stopped. My fiancé, my future wife, was on a dream vacation I'd paid for, and her ex-boyfriend was right there beside her, smiling, completely at home. It felt like I was watching a movie, a terrible, low-budget drama where I was the only one who didn't get the script. The silence in my own apartment that night was deafening, making the betrayal sting even deeper. This story, though, doesn't actually begin with that punch to the gut. It starts with me being a complete idiot, thinking generosity and trust were the same thing. My name is Ethan. I'm 34 years old, an architect living in Austin. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. I've always been careful with money, the kind of guy who maxes out his retirement account and actually reads the fine print on his credit cards. 3 years ago, I met Olivia at a friend's wedding. She was a bridesmaid, I was at the singles table, and honestly, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever spoken to. The kind of person who just lights up a room effortlessly. We started dating 2 weeks later, and by month 6, I knew she was it. The person I'd been waiting for, the one who made me want to build a future, not just a career. After a year, she moved into my apartment. We adopted a cat, talked about kids, even dreamed about where we'd retire. All the normal things couples do when they're planning forever. Last March, I proposed to her at a small Greek restaurant in downtown Austin. I got down on one knee right there between the tables, and she said yes before I even finished the question. I remember thinking, this is what happiness feels like, this complete, overwhelming certainty that you've made the right choice. Everything was perfect until about 6 months ago. That's when Olivia started talking about her family more, specifically about how her mom, Eleanor, had always dreamed of visiting Greece, but never had the money to go. Olivia's family wasn't poor, but they definitely weren't comfortable either. Her dad worked construction, her mom was a part-time bookkeeper, and a trip to Europe was just never in their budget. Olivia brought it up maybe 3 times over a few weeks, never directly asking, but always with this wistful, sad tone, like it was an impossible dream. And one night, after dinner, I just said it. I told her I'd pay for the whole family to go to Greece for 10 days. I saw her face absolutely light up, and I felt like a hero, like I was doing this incredibly generous thing for the people who raised the woman I loved. Looking back, I can see how naive that sounds, but at the time, it felt right. It felt like what you're supposed to do when you're joining a family. The trip was set for late September. It would be Olivia, her mom Eleanor, and her younger sister, Chloe, who's 26 and works in marketing. I started planning everything in July. I booked the flights through my credit card to rack up points, reserved hotels in Athens, Santorini, and Mykonos, nice places, but not luxury, 3-star spots with good reviews. I even set up a separate checking account just for the trip expenses, transferring $8,000 into it. I gave Olivia the debit card and told her to use it for food, museums, train tickets, anything else they needed. I specifically said, I trust you. Use it for whatever makes the trip better. I want you guys to enjoy this without worrying about money. And I meant it. I really did. I wasn't trying to control anything. I wasn't asking for receipts or checking the balance every day. I just wanted them to have an amazing time. Olivia kept saying thank you, how lucky she was, how her mom was going to cry when she found out. Honestly, I felt fantastic about the whole thing, like I was investing in my future family. The only weird part was that I wasn't going with them. Olivia said her mom wanted it to be a girls' trip, some bonding time before the wedding. I didn't think anything of it because I had a huge project at work anyway and couldn't really take 10 days off. They left on a Friday morning in late September. I drove them to the Austin airport at 5 a.m., helped them with their bags, kissed Olivia goodbye, and told them to send lots of photos. The first few days seemed fine. Olivia would text me pictures of the Parthenon, delicious-looking pasta dishes, and her mom smiling in front of ancient ruins. We video called every evening around 8 my time, which was 3 a.m. in Greece. But something felt off during those calls, and I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Olivia would always step out onto a balcony or into a bathroom, never showing me the room or who else was around. Her answers to my questions were always slightly vague. When I asked what they did that day, she'd give me this general rundown that lacked any real detail. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she was probably just tired or trying not to wake up her mom and sister. But there was this knot in my stomach that got tighter every single night, and I hated that feeling because I didn't want to be the jealous, controlling boyfriend who didn't trust his fiancée. On the fourth night, I called her at our usual time, and she picked up on video. She was at a restaurant. I could see candles and wine glasses. I asked her how dinner was going. She was smiling, saying it was great, the food was incredible. And then the camera shifted, just for a second, a quick pan across the table. And I saw him. Clear as day. Sitting right next to her with a plate of pasta in front of him. Julian. Her ex-boyfriend. The guy she dated for 2 years before me. Sitting at a table in Athens on my dime. My brain kind of froze for a second because I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. And Olivia must have realized, because she quickly said, "Oh, my service is cutting out. I'll call you tomorrow." And ended the call before I could even say a word. I sat there in my apartment, staring at my phone screen, at my own reflection in the black glass. It felt like the entire floor had just disappeared beneath me. I didn't call her back. I didn't text. I didn't do anything for about 20 minutes because I needed to think clearly and not let my emotions take over. I started going through the facts in my head, like I was working through an architectural problem, laying out the evidence piece by piece. Fact 1, her ex was in Greece with them. Fact 2, she hadn't mentioned it before they left. Fact 3, she'd been acting weird on our calls all week. Fact 4, she ended the call the second I saw him. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some coincidence where they ran into him at the Acropolis. This was planned. She knew he was coming, and she didn't tell me, which meant she knew I wouldn't be okay with it, which meant she chose to lie by omission rather than have an honest conversation. I felt physically sick. Not angry yet, but just this deep sinking feeling like I'd been played for a fool. I opened my banking app and checked the account I'd set up for the trip. The balance showed they'd spent about $4,000 so far, which was more than I expected for 4 days, but I told her not to worry about money, so maybe they were just eating well. I sat there for probably an hour, just thinking, trying to figure out what kind of person does this. What kind of person takes their ex on a trip their fiancé paid for and thinks that's somehow acceptable? The rage came later, but in that moment, I just felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and removed something essential, something I didn't know I could live without until it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my couch in the dark, replaying that video call in my head, seeing Julian's face next to hers, seeing the wine glasses and the casual way they were sitting together, like it was completely normal. By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. And it wasn't based on emotion. It was based on a simple principle I should have never forgotten: my money comes with the assumption of honesty. And the second that's gone, the money should be gone, too. I wasn't going to strand them in Europe. I'm not that kind of person. The flights home were already paid for, and the hotels were prepaid through booking confirmations. They had a roof over their heads and a way back to Austin. But everything else, every meal, museum ticket, and train ride they wanted to take, that was coming out of their own pockets now. Because I was done funding whatever this trip had actually become. At 6 a.m. Austin time, I logged into my bank account and froze the debit card I'd given Olivia. Then I transferred the remaining $4,000 back into my main account. It took maybe 90 seconds total, and when it was done, I felt this strange calm. Not satisfaction, exactly, but clarity, like I'd finally stopped being a passive participant in my own life. The call came about 4 hours later. It was early afternoon in Greece, and my phone started buzzing with Olivia's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I had to face this eventually. So, I picked up and immediately heard yelling. Not even a hello, just straight into, "What the hell did you do?" The card isn't working. We're stuck at a restaurant and the card got declined. Her voice was high and panicked, and I could hear her mom, Eleanor, saying something sharp in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. I kept my voice level and said, "The card's frozen. The account is closed. You have enough to get home, but that's it." There was this pause, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she started crying. Not sad crying, but angry crying, telling me I was being cruel and controlling. How could I do this to her family? To her mom, who'd been dreaming about this trip her whole life. I let her finish, and then I asked the only question that mattered. I said, "Was Julian invited, or did he just show up?" The line went quiet for a few seconds before she said her mom had invited him because he'd always wanted to see Greece, and it seemed mean to exclude him. That answer told me everything I needed to know, because it meant this wasn't some last-minute thing. Her mom had planned this probably weeks ago, and Olivia had gone along with it without saying a word to me. I asked her when she found out, and she admitted she'd known for about 2 weeks before the trip. She said her mom had told her, and she didn't know how to bring it up to me because she knew I'd be upset. She kept saying, "It doesn't mean anything. He's just a friend now." Mom thought it would be nice for him. I remember thinking how insulting it was that she thought I'd believe that she thought I was stupid enough to think her ex-boyfriend just happened to be a charity case her mom wanted to include on a romantic trip through Greece. I told her, "You had 2 weeks to tell me, and you chose not to. You chose to let me find out by accident, and that tells me exactly how much you respect me." She started arguing that I was being unfair, that her mom had put her in an impossible position, that she couldn't say no to her own mother. But here's the thing about impossible positions, they're only impossible if you're not willing to make a choice. And Olivia had made hers. She'd chosen her mom's comfort over my trust. And now she was mad that there were consequences. Her sister, Chloe, got on the phone at some point, younger and angrier than Olivia, telling me I was being petty and vindictive, and that I was ruining their trip over nothing. I asked her if she'd known about Julian coming, and she said, "Of course I knew. Everyone knew except you." Like I was the idiot who wasn't supposed to be in on the family secret. That hurt worse than anything Olivia had said because it meant all 3 of them had sat around discussing this, probably laughing about how clueless I was, how easy it was to spend my money while lying to my face. Chloe called me controlling and said, "Real men don't use money as a weapon." And I told her, "Real partners don't lie for 2 weeks straight. I'm not controlling anything. I'm just not paying for it anymore." I could hear Eleanor in the background now, Olivia's mom, saying something about how I was being disrespectful and that she'd raised Olivia better than to be with someone so cold. The irony of her calling me disrespectful while she was the one who'd invited my fiancé's ex on a trip I funded wasn't lost on me, but I didn't bother pointing it out because these weren't people who were going to suddenly see reason. Olivia got back on the phone, and her voice had changed. It wasn't angry anymore, but pleading. She said, "Please, baby, I'm sorry. I should have told you. Just unfreeze the card, and we'll talk about this when I get home." Part of me wanted to give in because I'd loved this woman for 3 years, and hearing her cry made my chest physically hurt. But a bigger part of me knew that if I backed down now, I'd be teaching her that lying works as long as you apologize after you get caught. I told her the decision was final. They had everything they needed to get home safely, and we'd talk when she was back in Austin. She asked what that meant, if I was breaking up with her, and I honestly didn't know the answer yet, so I just said, "I don't know what this means. I just know I'm done pretending this is okay." Before she could respond, I hung up and put my phone face down on the table because I knew the calls and texts were going to keep coming, and I needed space to think. When I finally checked it a few hours later, there were over 50 messages. From Olivia, apologizing, explaining, and begging. From Chloe, calling me every name she could think of. From numbers I didn't recognize, which I assumed were Eleanor, though I didn't bother checking. I spent that whole day in my apartment, just sitting with what had happened, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs that Olivia wasn't the person I thought she was. The thing that kept coming back to me wasn't even about Julian being there. It was about the lying, about how easy it had been for her to look me in the eye every day for 2 weeks, knowing what was coming, and not saying anything. That's not a mistake. That's not a moment of weakness. That's a character trait. And if she could lie about this, she could lie about anything. I thought about all the times she'd stepped away during our video calls, how she'd never shown me who else was in the room, how she kept her answers vague, like she was trying not to slip up. She'd been managing me, feeding me just enough information to keep me happy while hiding the truth. And that realization made me feel like I'd been dating a stranger. My brother called that evening after Olivia apparently reached out to him, and he asked me what was going on in this careful voice, like he was talking to someone on a ledge. I told him the whole story, and he was quiet for a minute before saying, "Man, that's messed up, but are you sure freezing the card was the right move?" I asked him what he would have done, and he admitted he didn't know, but he said it felt extreme. Everyone wanted to tell me I'd gone too far, that I should have just had a conversation. But none of them seemed to understand that the conversation was supposed to happen before the lying, not after. I didn't cut off the card to punish Olivia. I cut it off because continuing to pay for that trip would have meant accepting what she'd done. And I wasn't going to do that. The money wasn't the point. The money had never been the point. It was about drawing a line and saying, this is where my generosity ends, and my self-respect begins. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I realized something that genuinely scared me. I realized that if I took her back without real consequences, this would be my marriage. A relationship where she made decisions behind my back, and apologized only when she got caught. I thought about being 45 with kids and a mortgage, and finding out she'd been hiding things for years, bigger things than an ex-boyfriend on vacation. And I knew I couldn't let this go just because confronting it was uncomfortable. She'd chosen to protect her mom's feelings over our relationship, and that told me everything about where I ranked in her priorities. They got back to Austin 5 days later, and I knew because Olivia texted me from the airport, asking if I'd come pick them up. I didn't respond because the answer was obviously no, and I figured silence said that clearly enough. She called twice, and I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the messages, she sounded exhausted and defeated, saying they'd taken an Uber and that she wanted to talk as soon as possible. I'd spent those 5 days preparing for this conversation, not rehearsing lines, but getting myself into the right headspace, reminding myself that love doesn't mean accepting disrespect, and that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. She showed up at my apartment the next morning. She still had her key, so she let herself in. I was sitting on the couch with coffee when she walked into the living room. She looked terrible, tired, pale, like she'd been crying for days. My first instinct was to comfort her, because that's what 3 years of loving someone does to you. But I stayed seated and asked her to say what she came to say. She sat down across from me and started apologizing, telling me she knew she'd messed up and that she should have told me about Julian from the beginning. She said her mom had sprung it on her 2 weeks before the trip, that Julian had apparently been talking about wanting to visit Greece, and Eleanor thought it would be nice to include him since he'd always been good to their family. Olivia said she panicked and didn't know how to tell me because she knew I'd either be hurt or try to stop the trip entirely. And she convinced herself it would be easier to just let it happen and deal with the fallout later. I asked her if she understood why that was worse, why choosing to hide it was worse than the actual situation. And she nodded and said she did now, but at the time, she was just trying to keep everyone happy. That phrase, trying to keep everyone happy, that's what made me realize this wasn't fixable. Because she'd included everyone in that equation except me. I told her, you weren't trying to keep me happy. You were trying to keep me ignorant. There's a difference. She started crying again, saying she loved me and that this didn't change anything between us. But it changed everything between us. Because I'd spent 3 years thinking I was with someone who valued honesty. And it turned out I was with someone who valued avoiding conflict more. I asked her about Julian, about what he was doing there beyond just tagging along. And she swore nothing happened between them, that he slept in a separate room and they barely talked except at group dinners. I told her I actually believed that, because this wasn't about whether she cheated. It was about whether she respected me enough to include me in decisions that affected our relationship. She kept saying her mom had put her in an impossible position, that if she'd said no to Julian coming, her mom would have been hurt and angry. I looked at her and said, "So, you chose your mom's comfort over my trust, and now you're surprised that has consequences?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there crying and asking what she could do to fix this. I'd been thinking about that question for days, and I'd realized there wasn't anything she could do, because the problem wasn't a mistake. It was her instinct when faced with a difficult choice. Her instinct was to lie and smooth things over and hope for the best. That's not something you fix with an apology. That's something fundamental about how a person operates. I told her I needed time, that I wasn't making any permanent decisions right then, but that I couldn't just go back to normal like nothing happened. She asked if I wanted her to move out, and I said yes, at least temporarily, because I needed space to think without her physically being in my apartment. She looked devastated and asked if this meant we were breaking up. And I told her, honestly, I don't know what this means yet, but I know that right now I don't trust you, and I don't know if that's something I can get back. She packed a bag that afternoon, took some clothes and toiletries, and the cat, because she'd always been closer to him anyway. And when she left, she turned at the door and said, "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you." I believe she never meant to hurt me, but I also knew that intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact of her choices was that I'd spent 2 weeks feeling like an idiot while funding a vacation that included her ex-boyfriend. The next few weeks were strange. We'd text occasionally, and she'd update me on where she was staying, which was with her sister, and she'd ask if I was ready to talk yet. My friends were split on what I should do. Half of them thought I should forgive her because everyone makes mistakes and the relationship was otherwise good. The other half thought I should walk away because if she'd lie about this, she'd lie about anything. I spent a lot of time thinking about what marriage to Olivia would actually look like. And I kept coming back to the same image, me finding out years later that she'd made major decisions without telling me because she didn't want to deal with conflict. Maybe it would be about money, or where we lived, or how we raised our kids. But the pattern would be the same. Her avoiding difficult conversations and me feeling blindsided when the truth came out. I realized I didn't want that life. I didn't want to spend 40 years wondering what else I didn't know. About a month after she moved out, I asked her to meet me for coffee. And I told her I couldn't do this anymore, that I loved her, but I didn't trust her, and I didn't see a path back to trusting her. She cried and asked if I was really going to throw away 3 years over one mistake. And I told her, it's not one mistake. It's a choice you made every single day for 2 weeks. Every time you looked at me and didn't tell me what was happening, you chose this outcome. She left that coffee shop, and I haven't spoken to her since, except through texts about logistics, who keeps what furniture, that kind of thing. Her family thinks I'm cruel. I know that because Chloe posted something vague on social media about men who use money to control women. And I'm sure Olivia's told her version of the story where I'm the villain who abandoned her over nothing. But I'm okay with being the villain in someone else's story, because I know what actually happened. I know I gave her a chance to be honest, and she chose not to take it. 3 months later, I'm doing fine. I'm not dating anyone yet, but I'm not closed off to it either. Mostly, I just feel relieved that I figured out who Olivia really was before we got married, instead of after. People ask me if I regret how I handled it, if I wish I'd been less extreme. And honestly, no, I don't regret it. Because that moment when I froze the card was the moment I decided my self-respect mattered more than keeping the peace. Olivia is not a bad person. She's just someone who prioritizes avoiding conflict over being honest. And that's fine for her, but it's not fine for me. I think about that video call sometimes, seeing Julian sitting there next to her. And I remember the feeling in my stomach, that drop of realization that I'd been lied to. That feeling taught me something important. It taught me that generosity without boundaries is just being a doormat. And that trust, once broken, doesn't heal just because someone says they're sorry. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just clear about what I deserve. And what I deserve is someone who tells me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who includes me in decisions that affect us both. Olivia wasn't that person, and I'm glad I found out when I did. Losing money hurts, but losing years to the wrong person hurts more. Do you think I was too harsh, or did I do what anyone would have done?